Hello, fellow investors, and welcome to another episode of Ritter on Real Estate. We teach you how to passively invest like a pro. Today, my guest is Reed Goossens. Reed is, he's an old pro to the podcasting world, to the book writing world, to the syndication world. Really excited to have a good conversation with him today and get into some details of scaling his business, now really his second syndication business, and some of the trials and tribulations and lessons learned through that process. Reed, in 2012, quit his job in Australia and moved halfway across the world to the US to change his life and to chase a dream. So with limited funds and no investing experience and no credit, he went on purchasing a small duplex to growing his own real estate investing firm, which is now RSN Property Group. And he now syndicates large multifamily deals across the US and has achieved financial freedom and taking control of his life, which I think all of us on here are trying to achieve. So Reed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mate, thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time coming. I know that.
That's absolutely right. And you probably don't remember this because I think you were speaking back then, but I think the first time I met you was 2017 at like the first Jake and Gino conference.
Yep.
Or maybe it was the second conference they did, but I think it was 2017. Yep.
That was right. Was that in was that Nashville or Knoxville? Was that not?
It was Knoxville. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Those guys have done really, really well for themselves as well.
They have for sure. They've been great advocates of me and my growth. And yeah, that was really when I first was really digging into taking it from me being kind of the one-man show and doing the duplexes and the fix and flips and things and saying, man, I need to scale this. I need to get into multifamily. That conference was one of my first forays into that. So appreciate the advice at the conference. And here we are, 5-6 years later.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Sharing the mic. I love it. Well, Reed, I gave folks a quick understanding of who you are, but, take people through your story, tell people a little bit more about who you are and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah. So the story goes, I moved here a decade ago in 2012, and it was really just to be an expat in New York City. I actually had backpacked through the United States in 2009. And for any young entrepreneurs out there in their early 20s, don't worry about starting a business just yet. Go out and backpack the world and learn how to stretch a dollar, come back, and you'll be just fine. But came through the US and fell in love with New York City. I'd previously been living in London as a structural engineer. And at the time, I'd met this American girl. And so I sort of was like, look, I need to live in this city at some point in the future. And so went back to Australia, started, just getting back into my day job, which was civil engineering. Felt very small cog in a big machine type of thing. I think a lot of people on the show would feel that way, feeling frustrated with a W-2 job. We don't call it a W-2 job, obviously, in Australia, but, the idea of being in a corporate America or corporate Western world. And that's where I stumbled upon the Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I started looking into, wanting to do more with my life. And I started attending local real estate events in Australia, to maybe do a fix and flip or maybe do a lease option or, very similar strategies that they teach here, but it was on like kindergarten level. And so when I eventually moved to the US at the end of 2011, I sort of said, screw it, I'm going to chase this girl to the US and let's go live in New York City. And I didn't have a job. 2 weeks fresh off the boat, I was at my, the New York RIA, the Real Estate Investment Associations, and they are it was jam-packed into early 2012 with, fast talking Americans. And I was just like, I'd come from like maybe a small 10, 12 meetup group in local Brisbane, the local leagues club, to being, the I remember it was Pennsylvania hotel above the Penn Station, and just being bombarded with a lot of information. And that's where I started to try and change my mindset around, understanding the US lingo, like what's an EIN number and LLCs and all this sort of stuff. And just how do I get, what's a credit score? Like, I didn't even know what a credit score was, right? Like we don't really have that, we have it in Australia, but it's not sort of used the same way. And very quickly I realized just how cheap property was here, like particularly in secondary and tertiary markets. And so I used to get on a Greyhound bus up to Syracuse, New York, because that was one of the other guys at the group was doing sort of, very cheap $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 duplexes and triplexes. And I said, I've got $10,000. Let's go. Let's go. And, had a pretty wide open, eye-opening experience, understanding Section 8 housing. And I bought my first property, I think 6 months being fresh off the boat for $38,000. It was a triplex, and a lot of lessons learned. From there, today I run RSN Property Group through another company I co-founded, which we can talk about as well. Done 685 million of assets under management today, over 3,500 units, and a lot of stories have happened in between, my friend. So
Yeah.
we can unpack it. There's a lot of lessons learned along the way, and a lot of tidbits that I think I can be beneficial to those folks who are listening today, sitting on the sideline or wanting to take that next step and not necessarily understanding how to. So
yeah. I love it, Reed. I mean, awesome experience. I love the story of, it always seems to come back to a girl, right? You met that girl in New York. You said, man, I got to get back here. And like, look what that led to, right?
Exactly.
Look what that led to now.
Exactly.
So what I'd love to focus on today with you, because it's just so near and dear to my heart and really my journey over the past 8 months specifically now, is that getting from, being the guy, that syndicator, that one person, right, who's kind of doing this, whether it's a hobby and you still have your W-2, or whether you're full-time and doing it really mostly on your own, like I was, to really scaling and growing a team and building a true business out of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something that's sustainable and something that ultimately one day, right, can run without you. I think that's the goal, is to build a business that can live on its own. So I'd love to just dig into your story and kind of unpack those elements, because I think you've done it a couple times now. And I think there's a ton of lessons learned for people in that.
Yeah. So the first major mind shift, because one of the things with my story is that I had to have a W-2 job to be in this country, right? I had a visa, right? If I didn't work. So when I first moved to the US, I didn't have a job and I was on a tourist visa. And I ran around to all the different engineering firms until I got one. And then in 2014, I moved to LA, where my wife is from. And I was sort of at that point, had been like 6-7 years in the engineering field. And I was sick of being an engineer, but I was really, really, really like hell-bent on getting in the real estate development world. Mm-hmm. And that was when sort of the light bulb went off. And I was like, I've got this skill set that I could go and get a corporate job, keep the visa paid, and continuing to learn. So I went and joined a developer down in Long Beach, and we built, over the period of 3 or 4 years, we built a lot of ground up construction, urban infill, sort of type 1 over type 4, podium level with stick on top, the really high density type of, LA living. Mm-hmm. And that really, I got to see the insides of how a big development company works. At the same time, I was also doing, co-syndicating on the side. I started a podcast investing in the US back in 2014, which was in and around sharing my story with other people and then trying to raise capital. I then, got a mentor, who's a very big mentor. You were just at his conference the other day. I think I was his 2nd or 3rd student back in the day. And I started raising on those guys' deals. And then I got to a point where I was like, I know I needed to do more with it, but I was in LA and I was looking at deals in, Texas and all that sort of stuff. And that's where I started, like, just the little things. So one of the tidbits that I was working full time at the development company, but I didn't have enough time to go out and underwrite deals. So I was like, but I was pretty handy with a spreadsheet. So my first sort of like outsourcing, so to speak, was actually 2 kids from USC that I paid $15 an hour to go out and underwrite my deals for me, right? And it allowed me to free up my time, so I didn't have to, they were doing 4 or 5 deals a week. Well, it was 4 or 5 more deals a week than I was doing, and because I was working full time, I had to still have to, keep the girlfriend and keep the roof over their head and all that sort of stuff. So that's, the basic element of like trying to find a job that would keep me learning, but also then keeping and investing in other help outside of that, because I needed to just, sort of put shots on goal, so to speak, and underwrite a lot of deals. So through that process is where I met my first business partner, and that's where partnerships come in. And I think the scale, to your question originally, comes from is,
Yep.
You have to, when you start a business, you don't have a ton of money, right? You've got really limited resources. And so finding a business partner who can be your yin to my yang and be complementary skill sets is really, really important, because you're both in that sense of like, we can run, I can go doubly as quick with another person here,
Yep.
pedaling as hard as I'm pedaling. And so, cut a long story short, I found my former business partner, and we formed the company Wildhorn Capital, and that's where we did our first major lead syndication, and that was 192 units in 2016, and from there we grew the company to I think 10 or 12 assets. And like you, Ken, I did 4 major lead syndications before I quit my day job, and it was around trying to get my green card. So when I finally eventually married my wife in 2017, so a lot of stories there, which I'm sure you're going to ask questions on, but that's just sort of a little bit of the path and the understanding way back from like, okay, I don't want to be an engineer. How do I use my skill set to pivot into a role that I can continue to learn and continue to be paid, then use that to pivot to doing deals on the side and all that sort of stuff. And eventually it became a snowball and into what it is today.
And I think that's an incredible story. And so let's unpack it a little bit. So focusing on the scaling piece. So you were a one-man show, right? Eventually you get to the point, as we all do, where there's just too much to do. I can't do everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't underwrite, you can't call, you can't raise money, right? There's too many jobs. And so you went out and you found, pretty savvily found, sounds like some cheap labor, right? And to be able to do some underwriting for you, right?
Right.
So that's extremely helpful. My parallel path, so funny, is I essentially did the same thing. I had a kid that came to my meetup. He was a senior in college, said, "Hey, I want to learn about real estate." And I said, "Hey, oh, great." He said, "I'll teach you about real estate if you underwrite for me. I'll teach you how to underwrite. I'll teach you how to look at markets." So similarly, we did the same thing. And he was an intern for me for about the first year. And that worked really well. So it seems like step one in both our stories of scaling is find maybe folks that want to learn, that you can, and then you can leverage whatever skill set you're lacking or don't have enough time to do. But I think your first step when you're first starting out, I think key component is we both were able to find some relatively cheap labor to get some scale. And maybe it's a VA, maybe it's another tactic, right? But it's kind of that first person you bring on to offload that task that isn't your highest and best use, right?
Correct. Yeah, no, that's fine. And you mentioned a meetup. Like you started a meetup, right? I started a meetup in LA when I first moved here in 2014. It was called Wind Down Wednesdays. And it was a lot of work, but it was to try and meet other folks, like, put myself in a similar situation like you did. So it seems very, very parallel path in Kismet that we did identical paths, just in different states and different cities.
Places.
But the reason I started the meetup, and I don't know if it's the same for you, was to, for whatever reason, you give someone a microphone, you're 20% more likely to know what they're talking about, right, in front of a small audience. So it was just more about the cultivation of bringing people together, and through that cultivation, opportunities could come up, like you met your intern. So it's another example or step in the process that helps you be surrounded by people who can then opportunities can come your way.
Excuse me. That's a great point. Excuse me. That's a great point, because I hadn't planned on focusing there, but you're right. It was really that meetup for both of us that brought these initial opportunities, and later it sounds like even brought partnerships. And so it's, as you're thinking about scaling, well, how are you finding? The key to scaling is surrounding yourself with great people, right? Like that's the secret. We'll get there. I let the cat out of the bag, but the way to do that, first of all, you got to surround yourself with those people and understand, put yourself in a place where there's opportunities to meet great people that are like-minded, right? So if there's nothing out there you can find, maybe like Ritter, start something yourself.
Right.
And that's a fantastic step. So, okay. So then you find your first partner, and I love what you said around you're finding complementary skill sets, right? And so talk about that a little more, because I think that is a key way to scale is through partnership. But talk about the maybe just talk about what makes a good partnership and what makes a not so good partnership. What are the things you learned in the process?
Yeah, look, I think in the beginning, you're so eager, right? You jump into bed. You don't jump into bed with anyone, and I'd done a few co-syndications with my mentor. So it wasn't like I was just coming in this fresh and going, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. It was like I'd done a few reps to, I think, 2 or 3 deals, raising small amounts of money, but like I could see it. Like I was like, it's just there. Like I just what I need to change is the underwriting. And then once I changed the underwriting and going and sourcing deals, it really was a numbers game at that point, right? For my, because my engineering brain's like, if I just do enough underwriting, I'll eventually find the needle, right?
That's right. That's right.
So it was like, that was where, through one of them on a conference that my mentor had going on at the time, I was hunting in Central Texas, and I met this my former business partner Andrew, who we started Wildhorn Capital with. He was in Central Texas, but I was in LA, and I was working in LA and trying to get away on weekends. And I remember, we started having like work from home Fridays, and I'd fly out on a Thursday night to Central Texas and pretend like be on work calls, but like also try to tour a few deals.
Walking around property.
So it was just like you did what you needed to do, and that's where I needed to have that boots on the ground because I just wasn't there. And he, on the flip side, he came from Dell, and he didn't have that sort of institutional underwriting or management coming from ground up construction, being an engineer. Like he just didn't have that part to him. So we were comparing notes, and it was just like, let's go try and take down a deal. And the first deal was co-branded RSN Wildhorn, and then we sort of just went under one brand, and we grew it from there. And it was great in the beginning because you just grow something organically. I think we got to 8 or 9 deals before we brought on our first employee, right? It was a lot of freaking work, and still, the first 4 deals was still working full time, right? I remember having difficult conversations with him to say, like, look, man, I can't quit the job just yet. He was with Dell. He went in, I think after the first deal, he was like, oh, I'm quitting. And I was like, well, I can't, because I'll be kicked out of this country. I don't have a green card yet. So there was a little bit of that. And, but at the end of the day, it was complementary. And that's, I think, the most important thing. And that helps you get started, right? And today we're not partners anymore. I'm still co-GP in all the deals. And, I started that company from scratch, and it was hard to walk away, and we can talk about what happened. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we got to the point where we built this, pedestal, and he wanted to stay local and focused around Central Texas. And I wanted to start expanding the wings, like I was getting on planes every other week, flying 2 or 3 hours to get to Central Texas. Like I could do that in Phoenix. I could do that in, Denver. I could do that. And this was sort of like, I could see the scale that the product that we were underwriting was in so many other markets that we were seeing. The GDP growth, moderate cap rates, you're seeing rental rates go from $800 for a 2-bedroom up to $1,200 for a 2-bedroom, and it was all value add multifamily. One thing I will add that, just sort of a little bit off topic, but multifamily doesn't exist in Australia, and it doesn't exist outside of the US in the scale that it does here. So you also have to realize I'm coming with a lens that I'm like, what the hell is this freaking asset class? This is incredible. Like you can go by 250 units. Like that doesn't even exist in Australia. And we don't need to get into why, but it doesn't exist in Europe. It doesn't exist in Mexico. It doesn't exist in Canada. So it's very unique to the US market. And when I first got here, I was like, I remember that triplex was like, I tried to buy the most amount of units with the least amount of money I had.
Yeah.
But it was always like the goal was to get to bigger stuff and that scale. And that by just doing bigger deals, partnering up with other folks, complementary skill sets allowed us to go and do 192 units, which is scale, right?
Yeah.
Rather than chipping away at the single families or the doubles or the singles, you could just jump. Like I went from having, I think, two triplexes and a duplex, and 1 fix and flip, and then like a year and a half later, I'm doing 192 units. It's just like it's insane to say that out loud. And when I tell people back home, they're like, "What are you doing? How much?"
Yeah.
Like that doesn't. So in itself, just doing the multifamily was scale in itself because you had 192 units, which was the first deal Andrew and I led. And from that, I was able to bring in systems around asset management, around construction management, based on my background, based on what I'd learned as the developer. It's not rocket science, but one of the things we did from day one that I implemented was bulk sourcing product from Asia. And I know a lot of people do it now, but back in 2016, no one was, at least in the sort of syndications world, no one was doing it. And it was, I think at the time it was just flooring, and it was just, cabinet hardware and some lights. It was very basic. But today it's cabinets, granite, sinks, faucets, anything besides the fridge and the baseboards and the paint, we're bringing in bulk. And that's a scalable system as well. And you could do it on the first 192 units, because I could go get a shipping container full of stuff and it's instantly cheaper. So there's so many elements there of scale around partnerships by doing that first deal to help you get to bringing the systems in place. And again, all those systems in the beginning were built by myself and Andrew, at a company. And we went on and did a lot of deals together before we eventually let go of the vine and brought on some people. So, yeah.
No, that's an awesome story. And so a couple of themes you hit on are, so we talked about partnerships. Partnerships are a great way to scale if you think about scaling and growing, right? But you also hit on systems, right? And you have to be developing systems. You can't recreate the wheel every single time, right? You have to have solid process. And with your engineering background, I'm sure that's second nature to you, and just the natural thing to do, right? You got to reduce the variability. But I think for others, what I've found, and where I found, in partnerships sometimes can be difficult, is when partners see things different way and want to build different systems, or don't really understand the need for systems so much,
right,
and want to fly more by the seat of their pants. And so I think being on the same page as a partnership is the only way to then be able to develop those systems. The only way to scale is to be able to do things repeatedly, right? And do it better every time that you approach that. So I think the people piece you hit on, the systems piece, is great. So obviously you were with Wildhorn, you guys build out the business and then decided to go your separate ways. Sounds like largely just because you had different scopes and different geographies that you were hoping to focus on. So then you leave and kind of catch us up from there, because now it's kind of your second venture out. And so talk about that process of kind of, maybe what are some of the things you learned at Wildhorn that you wanted to take forward into your second venture that helped you maybe get a leg up as you started your second one that folks can learn from?
I think the big thing is there can be sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to partnerships. We brought on a third partner, and that felt a little, just didn't feel right, not in alignment with what I wanted personally. And sometimes it's as basic as listening to your intuition. Like, it was tough to leave Wildhorn. It was tough to walk away, and I won't get into the details of that. But it was just, but I knew in 10 years' time that I built this company. I can go do it again, and it'll be in my own way. And to your point of like, sometimes you get to a point where you're building something in the direction that two founders want to go and might be separate. That's okay, but you have to then address it pretty quickly to then say, okay, what's going to happen here? And so on 2.0, really just blowing off the dust on RSN Property Group, because RSN's been around since day one. It did the first deal if you go back and look at the co-branding.
Sure.
But it was around like, now I had money, right? I had a couple of exits and I had money to go and invest in people. And I didn't necessarily want to have a partner at this point, because even though I do have a partner who comes in but I could hire for those positions I wasn't strong in. And that was the big thing that has come, and I've done it quicker. So coming back out an RSN, we've done, I think, 200 million AUM, call it 2.0 if you want to say, like, so not a ton of what we've built compared to Wildhorn, but Wildhorn was over 6 or 7 years, and RSN has been over the last 24 to 36 months.
Yeah.
I've gone out and hired more than what my actual asset management fees can cover. So I've gone and invested in the company to say, because I've got money in my pocket, okay, I'm not going to need a head of acquisitions. I'm going to need boots on the ground in certain markets. I'm going to need probably a business partner-esque of someone, or someone very senior who can be more of an integrator, and I'm going to be more the visionary, right?
Yeah.
I had been the integrator at Wildhorn, but needed to want to know that I wanted to be the visionary and change it in a certain way. And so that was the bigger lesson. And so now I've got employees that probably, if you look back at the same trajectory model, we had 0 people 3 or 4 deals in at Wildhorn, but now I've got 6 because I'm hiring for where I want to go.
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing. And it took me saying to myself, like, I've got some really great licks. We've sold some deals at Wildhorn. We had some really good money. I could go hoard it away with my acorns, for my family, or I could go take part of it and reinvest in the company and reinvest in people. And that has been the real thing. Because if you think back to when you started, you mentioned earlier, you being solo, and I had Brandon Turner on my podcast, and he talks about, you're on a tricycle, right? Just if you get off that tricycle, it ain't going anywhere, right? You get to a tandem bike, you've got another person, you can maybe take your wheels off, your feet off the pedals, but if both of you get off, it's not going anywhere, right?
Right.
Then you get to a car, right? And a car's got a bit of a dashboard. You've got 4 seats. People can interchange in the driver's seat. You can have some time in the back, but you've got, dashboards, so you're measuring things, you're making sure you're going the right speed. And then, it goes up from there. You've got a private jet, you've got, there's a train, there's different analogies of it. But the bigger you get, the more seats you have. And means that you, as the owner of the company, can employ people to be in a position that probably more than likely will run the position better than you can, right? And
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that I realized coming out of Wildhorn, was that I needed to employ people in positions that I don't necessarily. I was forcing myself to do, because we only had the 2 of us at Wildhorn doing the individual pieces. But now I had the money to go out and hire for things that I didn't want to do. Like, I like asset management because I've got to be in close to the coalface, but I don't need to be on every single call. You know what I mean? So
it becomes a hindrance to your ability to scale. Right?
Correct.
Spend too much time in the business. But
right.
Well, Reed, I love it's just the parallels between your and my journey are just uncanny, in that I viewed it the same way. I've done several partnerships. Some went really well, some not so much, a lot of lessons learned, but I really said the same thing. I said, I want to build the business in my own vision, and I want to do it in that way. And I want to do it by hiring to really have employees and really control the process, as you're saying, because what I found with partnerships was, like you said at the beginning, you kind of partner with everybody, right? Because you just want to get stuff done. Well, you end up in partnerships with 3 or 4 different people, and they all want to do things different ways. It completely limits your ability to create those systems that are so critical and so important, right? Because this guy manages CapEx this way, this guy manages it a different way, like all of it, right? And that was what I really felt, and why I really said, wow, I got to bring this together, right? Like, it sounds like you did, and really have the RSN way, right? Or the Hudson way, that we're going to go and execute all of our deals and allow us to scale. And so I love what you said about, you're not hiring for where you are now, you're hiring for where you want to go. Because to me, that's one of the biggest mistakes people make in building a business, is you hire reactively, right? You hire because all of a sudden there's a gap. It's like you're spinning all the plates, right? Oh, a plate dropped. Oh, we got to hire somebody so that doesn't happen again, right? Correct. Instead, you're hiring, which is the right way. You're hiring people that maybe don't have a full set of plates yet, right? And you can hand it over, right? And they can take it over, and none of the plates fall. And I think that's such a big lesson, clearly, from somebody in your experience who's done this multiple times, understands that. I think hiring for where you want to be is so important. And the quote I love, that I often live by, is just, you got to have faith over fear. And you got to have the faith that you're going to hire that person. That's an investment. It's not a cost, and it's going to create value in the organization. Right. That's correct. So I think that's such a powerful message. And clearly I just love the similarities, because that's exactly right. So you hired employees. Now you're controlling it. Now you can build something that's scalable. Just love that, man. I love the path you're on.
One of the, and I've got it here.
Yeah.
Traction.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone, people
Yeah.
are watching.
We follow US as well. So
yeah. So that's
there.
I've now realized what's my real mission, and not necessarily not my mission. What's my real role in this company, and it's to make sure I have the right bums in the right seats. There's only limited seats at RSN, right? Because we don't have a ton of properties yet, but you then have to think think into the future, like when we do get to 20 deals or 15 deals or whatever it is, what things don't necessarily want to constantly have to be in. And one of the things is maybe I need to bring in a head of asset management, right? Like I'm still overseeing my asset managers, but maybe there needs to be someone below me when we get to a certain scale. So just think about stuff like that. We're actually hiring right now a head of sales for equity, right? Equity is tough to raise in these days. And, we spend a ton of money on Facebook marketing, and leads come in, but they fall dead because me and my business partner don't have time just to pick up the phone all the time. So we need someone to be doing that and engaging with them, because we've spent the money on the leads. And otherwise, excuse my language, you're pissing money against the wall because you're not closing that loop. So what does that person look like? How much is that going to cost? And that's for me as the business owner, it's like, okay, I might have to go spend out 6 figures on that guy or gal, but I know it's going to be an investment, because then we can raise maybe double, and that double in one deal pays for their salary. So
absolutely.
Like thinking about that way is it's tough, because you've got to do the outlay before you see the reward, but constantly thinking about it as an investment is really, really important. So yeah.
I love that you brought up EOS and you brought up traction, because we recently have gone through our first 3 kind of visioning sessions, the beginning of the EOS process. And similarly, as you stated, where the reason I felt it was so important was, as I was building a team, and my intention was to go out and put heads at the top of each of the verticals within the company. Right. And like you said earlier, you want to hire people that are better at the job than you are. Right. That's the goal. Replace yourself with somebody better at that specific role. And as I looked at it so I brought in some fantastic people. They've come in mostly, actually all from large shops, all large multifamily shops in other places. And we've all come together. What I recognized, though, was the need to get us all singing on the same song sheet, for lack of a better term, moving in the same direction with clear strategy, clear mission, clear vision. That's why I felt the investment in traction, because that's not cheap either, the EOS system, but doing that early with 6 employees ahead of where most people do at about 10 to 50, again, was to get it right from the beginning. Because I've just seen in the multiple businesses I've been in, and then the consulting I've done with other businesses, the rework is so much more painful than just doing it right from the start, and so much more expensive. So I love similarly how you're investing in that, you're doing that, you're building that so that your team all talks about issues the same way, right? All identifies goals the same way, all works and has crystal clear vision on where you're going, which is so important. So just love that you brought that up.
Yeah. And it also helps, particularly if you've got people who may be in the infancy of the business, maybe you're hiring not the most senior person you can. And sometimes senior people come in with their own ideas and ideologies, and it's hard to get them. I've spoken to other people who have in the same position I am, and they've hired that 40-year-old exec, right, who doesn't buy into EOS, and it's been even harder compared to that 28-year-old who's got, is a little bit more malleable. So
for sure,
that has also been a real, as a young company, also youth within the ages of in the certain seats, but having that right mindset, because they're buying in from day one. And that's also really, really important.
Yeah. And that's one of those key EOS lessons, right? Is you got to hire, you hire the right person and then make sure they're in the right seat. And it's like that right person. I love how they distill that down in traction so simply of, do they meet your core values or do they not? It makes it crystal clear to know if you've got the right person there. And like you said, you've got to hire, like I call it like culture over content sometimes. Like you got to hire for that culture first, that culture fit, like you're saying, whatever that company culture is, that they fit that and they're going to be bought into it. Right. Because like you said, if you get somebody that's not, that's a cancer in the organization, and that does so much more damage. And so sometimes hiring a little younger, maybe folks that are willing to learn and still have an open mind, like you said, could create a ton of value. So yeah,
Yep.
that's fantastic. So as you've gone now, so you've got the team in place, you're building RSN, you've taken a ton of lessons learned, you're putting systems in place. If you had to call out, let's call out two things. What are the two biggest lessons learned that you would share with folks as for somebody that's kind of the solopreneur now? They've got maybe a deal under their belt, right? And they're saying, I really want to scale this thing. What are two takeaways you could give them?
I think if you're in the partnership world, understanding the first lesson I learned, it was understanding and we're doing a little work around that I'm worthy of being the visionary. There was a lot of, there's a lot of, do I have the responsibility to step into that seat? Right. Yeah. And that took a lot for me over the transition out of Wildhorn and all that sort of stuff. And I knew I had it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you still second guess. Right. And
that's imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that was a big lesson. And then I guess the other big lesson is learning to, or trying as best you can with the resources. And it might be limited. And that's why I gave the example of that USC undergrads underwriting for me. You don't have to go out and pay the six figures. You can start with smaller chunks. And maybe I do a thing every year where I sit on a whiteboard and I divide it into 4 quadrants, and the x-axis the y-axis is move the needle in the business, and the x-axis is enjoyment. And you break it up into black is in the far top right-hand corner. So it moves the needle in the business and you really enjoy it. The one next to the y-axis is the blue. And think about that like the conveyor belt in the business, all the things that have to get done to keep the business moving. You got the lowest one, which is red, which will be like administration stuff. And then you've got green, which is not necessarily moves the business a whole lot, but you get a lot of enjoyment. So like me, I like working out, I like going surfing, I like traveling. Like I need to do that in my life. And so you can do that all at every stage of the business. And what you're essentially doing is breaking up and creating job roles for people, and then thinking, okay, well, I'm as an entrepreneur, I'm doing all of it, right? Well, maybe I can, start just with fractional bookkeeping, or maybe I can start with fractional underwriting. And those are the little steps that you learn that may not cost you a lot of money, but helps you just run a little bit better. So you don't have to constantly always be, oh, have we done the books this month? Or have we done this and that? Have we got back to so-and-so? So doing that and being sort of disciplined to do that every single 6 months has been really, really valuable for me. And that lesson is for those people who are the solo entrepreneur. Learning to let go a little bit is another big lesson. So
yeah, those are awesome lessons. So you got to work on your mindset and believe that you can really do it. And then 2, you can start small. I guess, well, number 2 sounds like you have to delegate, because you can't do everything. So you got to let go a little bit. You have to delegate, but you can start small delegating. And I love that tool you just gave us of that quadrant to figure out what you should be delegating, right? Those things that aren't driving the needle and you don't love to do. That's the hot spot to say, how do you get some of those things off your plate? Right.
Correct.
And then just revisit that over and over again. So that's a fantastic technique. I want to visit mindset for a little bit, because you said it as your tip, because it's so critical. I mean, everything starts with mindset. So you said you had to do work to get to the point where you believed truly that you could be that visionary and you could lead this big business, right? Talk a little bit about, what kind of work was that, or what can you share with folks? Like, where can folks start to develop that strong mindset to believe that they can?
Well, I think, look, if you go back to just decisions in my life, like I remember moving halfway across the world to chase a girl. That was a pretty big, pretty big step. You when you start to realize the challenging moments in your life, you're pushing, being uncomfortable, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's sort of the big lesson. And you constantly pushing that envelope all the time. And the transition out of Wildhorn was one in which it shell shocks you, and that sort of takes you by surprise. And that's then, okay, well, I either can pick up the pieces and keep going, or I can crawl up in a ball and do nothing, right? And so that's sort of that time where and through a lot of meditation, I've got a business coach who actually has nothing to do with real estate. It's got everything to do with mindset. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of that and have been doing that for multiple years prior to even leaving Wildhorn, to make my top 2 inches in my brain as most beneficial for me as possible, so I can be the not only the best leader and entrepreneur, but also the best husband and the best person, the best brother, the best son, all those sort of things. And that's just one element of it, right? And so it did come around betting on myself. And if you look at all the steps in the story, it's about taking bets on one. Mm-hmm. You mentioned faith before. Mm-hmm. It's about if you can't bet on yourself, then who can you bet on, right? No one's just going to walk in the door and you sit on the couch and hand you your dreams. You've got to go out and take it for yourself and take the bull with 2 horns, like you have done, and like a lot of people on this, that listening to this show want to do. But it does truly come down to betting on yourself. And I remember back in the day, I mentioned a mentor back in there. Another clear vision of that was like, I always used to be like, oh, screw paying for mentors. Mm. But I actually changed the mindset of it. And I was like, I'm worthy enough to go and take a bet on myself. And that parting ways with Cash was that I'm worthy of that. We just mentioned before about delegating. You're worthy of delegating this task because you're better than this task, right? Mm-hmm. And that's okay. And that's just changing that mindset and the framing, the way you think about things, rather than thinking, oh gosh, I can't afford this, or the business can't afford doing X, Y, Z. It's like, well, what about you reframe that and saying, well, you're too valuable to be doing this task, and thus you need to outsource it. So they're the little things around mindset, and there's obviously a myriad of issues there, imposter syndrome and all that sort of stuff, but just basic sort of 101 mindset around how you can learn to take a bet on yourself.
Yeah. Well, I love the reframing, right? Because that's something everybody can do. And you're 100% right. It goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? Is it a cost or is it an investment? Right. And like, that was a big thing I had to learn for sure, because when you're starting out, and especially when you're hiring ahead of the curve, mm-hmm. right. And you got to say, oh man, you're looking at this payroll, or you're looking at, or we got to buy CoStar, that's this much, or Yardi, mm-hmm. and that's 25 grand, or, but you're saying, yeah, but it's going to help us run faster, right? It's going to help us do more deals. And this is a volume game at the end of the day, which I think a lot of people don't understand. You got to look at a lot of deals to find a good one, right? Mm-hmm. You got to have those systems. So I love the reframing. I love the reframing around the cost versus investment, and the idea of coaching. Similarly, I've got real estate mentors. I've got a business coach. I feel like I'm talking to another brother here, because we've got such parallel paths, and it's incredible because it's also validation. But I've saved so much, like the amount of money I've spent on coaching, which is over 6 figures. I know that I've saved or made 5X at least that, because of the advice I've gotten from those coaches and mentors, either staying out of bad deals or doing things and pushing myself to do things I wouldn't have done that have resulted in good things. So I think that's another critical component. You just don't know what you don't know. Right.
Exactly.
And sometimes you just need a kick in the pants, and sometimes we all need that too,
And it's just on that, you sort of, as I went through the transitioning and stepping into that, the visionary, everyone around me was like, oh, of course you were going to do that. Like it was, but for me, it was like I was so in my own head sometimes about it, that you overthink it. And you're like, everyone was like, no, my wife was like, yeah, of course. Yeah. I definitely saw this coming, 3 years ago. Like, and my business coach was like, oh no, definitely saw this coming. And I was like, oh, you did? And like, yeah. And like, but I did, so it was just like,
those perspectives are so valuable. And right, when you're too close to it, it's often difficult to see.
Right.
Well, Reed, you've provided tremendous value in the short time today. I love the principles that you've imparted. I think folks have to go back and re-listen to this episode. There's some awesome nuggets. Before I let you go, got our keys to success round I want to take you through.
Let's do it.
We've got 4 questions I want to ask you. The first one is, what is the one question that you would ask, put your investor hat on? What's the one question you would ask a deal sponsor if you could only ask one question?
Okay. If we could ask the deal sponsor one question, I think the question is, would you invest your kids' future college fund in this deal?
I like that. I like that. Yeah, that's right. Gets to the heart of it. And are they putting skin in the game, and how much does it mean to them? Right.
Right.
What are you most proud of in your career?
What am I most proud of? I think, there's so many things I'm proud of. I'm proud of traveling the world and backpacking. I'm proud of being a deckhand and cruising across the Atlantic Ocean on a super yacht. I'm proud, there's so many other, I think I'm proud of being curious. I think that's the biggest one, and consistently wanting to continue to be curious and never stop wanting to learn. I think that's what I'm probably most proud of.
Love it. Lifelong learner. What is a book that everybody should read?
One, obviously we mentioned Rich Dad Poor Dad earlier, but there's another one that I kind of give it pretty good raps. It's for around that sort of personal branding stuff. It's called Key Person of Influence. It's actually got nothing to do with real estate. It's got everything to do with creating you are a brand, and that helped with the imposter monster syndrome, as we were talking about earlier. That no one can take that away from you. And as written by another Australian called Dan Priestley. I've actually had him on my show. But KPI, Key Person of Influence, go check it out. Dan Priestley, really, really great book.
Love it. I love it. And last but not least, what is your number one key to success?
Key to success, I think trying to be as grounded as possible. Trying to always be grounded, not get, my dad was always say, don't put your head in the sky. It's always keep your feet firmly on the earth, and regardless of success or not success you have, you're not better than anyone else, and you're just a human like we all are, and keeping grounded as best you can.
I love it. That's important. And you've had a ton of success in your career. So cheers to you for keeping it grounded. And with that, Reed, before we let you go, how can folks get a hold of you if they want to learn more about what you're doing in your story?
Yeah, look, I'm all over social media: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. It's just Reed Goossens, ReedGoossens. You can also head to the same website, www.reedgoossens.com, to check out all the sort of the podcasting, the books, all the educational stuff. If you are interested more on the investment side, it's rsnpropertygroup.com. That's Reed Sophie Nell Property Group. And if you're ever coming through LA and you want to meet up for a beer or a drink, just hit me up at info@reedgoossens.com. Give me a little bit of heads up and we can meet up and talk shop.
I love it. And Reed, thank you so much for coming and sharing value today. I think, folks, if you guys are trying to scale your syndication business and you're going from being by yourself to building out a team, listen to this one about every 3 months and you'll pick up something new. I think over that first year, it'll help you get you through the path. So thanks again, Reed, and have a great rest of the day.
See you, mate.